All right, Nick, let's talk about the Texas A&M Aggies. What a huge win over one of the top teams in all of college football, the LSU Tigers. Texas A&M came out and showed they are contenders. This is a team that can go out and beat some of the best teams out there. I think this was really great win for them, but there's something even deeper here. A move that head coach Mike Elko made, I think, was the most genius part of this win. I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, Texas A&M, big win over LSU, but there's one move in particular that we think was the smartest decision that head coach Mike Elko made, and obviously that was the benching of cornerback Connor Wegman to bring in Marcel Reed. Let's get into the article, and we can talk more about this on the other side. This, of course, is over from ESPN. It says, looking for a spark in the third quarter while trailing LSU, Texas A&M coach Mike Elko benched his starting quarterback Connor Wegman and handed the ball to Marcel Reed. A play later, that spark caught fire, with Reed scoring on an 8-yard touchdown run on his first play, then leading the Aggies to 4 touchdowns and a field goal on their next 5 drives to power number 14 Texas A&M to a 38-23 win over number 8 LSU in front of 108,000 fans, their third largest crowd ever at Kyle Field. Obviously, unbelievable credit to Marcel Reed to be ready to go tonight, Elko said. It certainly wasn't Connor's fault. There was a lot of open windows. We couldn't get the passing game unglued at all. We couldn't call it right. I couldn't get them in to run it right. We couldn't get open. It was a litany of problems. Connor didn't throw it well at times. We just felt like we needed a spark. We pulled the trigger and went with Marcel, and what a spark gave us. Well, it certainly doesn't sound like it wasn't Connor Wegman's fault, but I think those are some nice words by Coach Elko. Nick, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one, but before we get to you, Nick, Aggie fans, in the comment section below, it's an interesting situation to be in right now. We see Marcel Reed, what he's able to do with this offense. We see Connor Wegman and what he's done at times with this offense. Let us know, though. What are your thoughts going forward? Do they stick with Marcel Reed? Is Connor Wegman need another chance? Let us know what your thoughts are on this now. I'd say somewhat of quarterback controversy going forward in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this move by head coach Elko?
Yeah, it is the most impactful in-game coaching decision since Nick Saban benched Jalen Hurts at halftime of the national championship game and went with Tua Tagovailoa, then a freshman, of course, and then the Alabama Crimson Tide famously went on to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. They came from behind, defeating them in overtime that year on a touchdown pass from Tagovailoa to Devontae Smith. This is the same level of impact. Now, obviously, the game is a different, right? A SEC game mid-season October is a completely different dynamic than the national championship game, but the impact was exactly the same. Obviously, it was only a 10-point game at the time the quarterback switch was made, but the reality was it felt like A&M couldn't do anything, right? It felt like unless they got some big special teams plays or broke some long runs, they were not going to get to 17 points, let alone the 38 they ended with, and ended up dominating LSU down the stretch the way their offense was executing. It just didn't seem possible. Enter Marcel Reed, and suddenly it's just a complete flip, right? It was absolutely unbelievable to watch. I know A&M fans, you guys had to be excited. Suddenly LSU looked like they couldn't stop anybody. It just was a tidal wave of offense coming at the Tigers defense. It was a great execution across the board from the Aggies offense. And I think it speaks to Elko's mindset and his strategy, which I really appreciate because he obviously has a lot of emphasis on the defensive background. That's sort of his mindset and in terms of how he likes to build his teams. Culture guy as well, of course. But when you have a guy with that kind of background, culture, defense, they're usually very hesitant to change quarterbacks, right? They're usually more about stability, field position, defense. They're not big rolling the dice. They're not big, real aggressive in terms of making personnel changes. Certainly not in game, right? Elko, to his credit, said, listen, we're not going where we need to go with Wegman. This is a huge opportunity for us. Let's put in Reed. Let's see where we end up. And I guarantee you Colin Klein was probably advocating for Reed as well during the game. And it turned out to be a genius move. It is probably the best coaching move we've seen, first of all, out of A&M since, I have no idea. You'd have to go back maybe 15, 20 years. I have no earthly idea the last time an Aggies head coach made such a smart in-game decision. It was an aggressive decision. Could have gone horribly, right? If Marcel Reed goes in there and turns it over a couple times, then it just looks like a terrible move. Instead, they insert Marcel Reed. They call a great plan with him in the game, and the Aggies just pour it on. And I don't know if the Reed is the guy long term. I don't know if Wegman is or not, but I think the fact that either or of them could be the guy, because remember, Wegman played pretty well against Missouri, who they dominated a short time ago. This is a team that can kind of go at you two different ways. They've got the Wegman attack approach, which can beat some decent teams. Remember, they killed Missouri, like I said. Or they can beat you with more of a Marcel Reed running quarterback kind of approach as well. I think playing both guys means opposing defenses are just going to have to really struggle to game plan, really struggle to come up with a good strategy, because you got to prepare for both. Could be Wegman throwing the football, could be Reed running the football. This Aggies team is dangerous, and I'm going to keep going back to this. It's all because of Mike Elko, the move he made, the leadership he's brought to the top of this Aggies organization. I think the best move Texas A&M in such a long time from a leadership perspective was going away from the big name, sexy name head coach, went away from the Jimbo Fisher kind of stuff, went to just an old school football guy like Elko. Looks to be a great decision so far, because Coach Elko delivered the biggest in-game decision in college football in probably half a decade.
Yeah, and again, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, because you look at the numbers. When Reed takes over at the beginning of the season, the first couple games, when Wegman is injured, I think it's interesting just because he does enough in the passing game. I don't think he's necessarily a boon in the passing game. I think he does enough. He never quite hit 200 yards, but he got close a good number of times. But he does a lot in the rushing attack for this team. And it's where Connor Wegman, on the other hand, in the two games, Missouri, Mississippi State, that he was at his tops, he does a little bit more in the passing game, but he doesn't do much in the rushing game. So I'm kind of with you where I don't know if they're going to keep a dual attack. I don't know if Marcel Reed's the guy to take over the helm. I think it's interesting because if, like you said, they do bring in Wegman and keep him as, like the more passing-centric quarterback, but then in certain situations you bring in a guy like Marcel Reed that's such a great athlete, I think that would do really great for the team, because you look back to Michigan. This reminds me of Michigan. They never exactly did what we're talking about here, but with Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy, McNamara is more like pocket passer-centric type of guy, where J.J. McCarthy is the more dynamic athlete guy, but he could also throw the ball very well, so maybe not a great example, but I just think Reed gives this team the spark. Like Elko said, this is a guy that came in and absolutely sparked them to a dominating victory. You look at these two teams, first half versus second half, completely different performances. I'm curious to see what they do, because I think whatever they do, Marcel Reed definitely has to be involved going forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. If I'm Elko and A&M, I probably, at least publicly, still play Wegman or start him and just see how defenses kind of are handling this A&M offense. Because LSU, obviously they're a talented bunch defensively, but they were just out of position. They did not know how to play Marcel Reed and the zone read game and then overall rushing attack that A&M was bringing in the second half of that game. I think you almost go with Wegman just to kind of see what teams are doing, and if they seem out of discipline, out of focus, you can throw Marcel Reed in there and run for 400 yards on them, right? Because obviously the one concern you have with Reed in the running attack, and it kind of showed a little bit, is that in some of the earlier games, is that if you don't have an aggressive throwing the game and you fall behind and Reed can't get the running game going, you can get in a death spiral offensively real quick, right? So you want to avoid that. That's why I kind of want to start with Wegman. I think that's kind of the strategy going forward. If things are going good, you ride that hot hand there. But if you think a team is kind of undisciplined and hyper-aggressive, which they were against Wegman, that sets up a guy like Marcel Reed to go for a huge performance. I think that's a strategy Elko is going to take. But regardless of what I think, it's very clear here. Elko made the move of the year he did in this game, and it resulted in a resounding victory for Texas A&M.